The man was about to die of cancer, but the stray cat did something unbelievable. The truth shocked everyone. How could a stray cat possibly find a small brooch lost 15 years earlier and miles away? While Marmalade's gift brought peace to Arthur's final days, the shocking truth might not be how the cat found the memento, but who or what truly sent it back. Subscribe, like, and listen to the full story to unravel the heartwarming mystery that defies explanation. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of late afternoon sunlight slicing through the dim living room. Arthur sat slumped in his worn armchair, the silence broken only by the ticking grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that usually measured out the empty hours. But today felt like a countdown. He wasn't waiting for anything good. Then a flash of orange fur blurred at the edge of his vision. Marmalade, the stray who had inexplicably adopted Arthur's quiet porch and, eventually, his house, padded silently into the room. Arthur watched him, indifferent, another creature sharing the waiting room of his life. But Marmalade wasn't just wandering today. He moved with an uncharacteristic purpose, heading directly towards Arthur's chair. He stopped just before Arthur's slippered feet, lowered his head, and gently deposited something small, dark, and dirt-encrusted onto the faded floral pattern of the rug. Arthur blinked. He hadn't seen the cat carry anything. What was it? A beetle? A clump of dirt? Marmalade looked up at him, large green eyes unblinking, then gave a soft, questioning meow before sitting back on his haunches, perfectly still, watching Arthur expectantly. Curiosity, a feeling Arthur hadn't felt much of lately, stirred faintly. He leaned forward, his joints protesting, his breath catching in his chest from the small effort. He reached down a trembling hand and hesitantly picked up the object. It was cool to the touch, heavier than a clump of dirt. He rubbed the grime away with his thumb. Metal glinted dully. Silver. Tarnished, yes, but definitely silver. As more dirt came away, a shape emerged. A delicate curve, intricate petals. A rose. A silver rose brooch. Arthur's breath hitched. His heart gave a painful lurch, a physical blow that seemed to echo the sudden, overwhelming shock flooding his mind. It couldn't be. He turned it over and over, his fingers tracing the familiar, delicate craftsmanship hidden beneath years of neglect. The clasp, slightly bent. The tiny, almost invisible maker's mark near the stem. It was Eleanor's brooch, the one she'd worn pinned to her favorite blue dress, the one they thought lost forever after that trip to the coast, vanished somewhere between the hotel room and the car nearly 15 years ago. He hadn't seen it since. His vision blurred. How? Where? He looked from the impossible object resting in his palm to the orange cat sitting sentinel at his feet. Marmalade just blinked slowly, offering no answers. The silence of the room pressed in, amplifying the frantic pounding in Arthur's chest. He clutched the brooch, the cool metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat flushing his skin. "Eleanor?" he whispered, the name a ragged sound torn from his throat. He looked at the cat, a silent, desperate question in his eyes. How? Just 3 days earlier, Arthur had walked out of Bedford County General Hospital for what he knew was the last time as a patient seeking a cure. The oncologist, Dr. Ramirez, a kind woman who always spoke plainly, had delivered the news with gentle finality. The latest, most aggressive round of chemotherapy hadn't worked. The cancer, relentless and insidious, continued its march. There were no more treatment options, only palliative care: hospice. Arthur, a retired history teacher and widower in his early 70s, had nodded numbly. He thanked the doctor, refused the offer of a counselor, and signed the discharge papers. He wanted to go home. If he was going to die, he would do it in his own house, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that suddenly felt both infinitely precious and unbearably distant. He'd driven home through the familiar streets of Harmony Creek, the town where he'd lived, taught, and loved for over 40 years, feeling like a ghost himself. The house felt colder, emptier than ever. Every object seemed to whisper of Eleanor. Her favorite armchair, still draped with the afghan she'd been knitting when she fell ill 5 years ago. Her collection of porcelain birds on the mantelpiece. Her reading glasses still resting on the bedside table as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. Her absence was a physical ache, a constant companion since the first cancer, the one that had been treatable but still stole her from him far too soon, had taken her 5 years prior. Now, facing his own end, the loneliness felt suffocating, compounded by the utter hopelessness of his diagnosis. He had resigned himself to waiting, adrift in grief and fatigue. He ignored the concerned calls from Carol, his neighbor across the street, letting the answering machine pick up her gentle inquiries. What was there to say? That's when the cat appeared. It was the day after he came home from the hospital. A splash of vibrant orange against the drab gray of the porch steps. A skinny stray, ribs faintly visible beneath its matted fur, but with startlingly bright green eyes that watched Arthur with unnerving intensity when he stepped out for the mail. Arthur, initially annoyed by the intrusion, tried shooing it away. "Go on, get," he'd grumbled, his voice weak. But the cat didn't run far, just retreated to the edge of the lawn, watching. It was back the next morning, and the morning after that. Persistent. There was something in its steady gaze, a quiet expectation, that chipped away at Arthur's resolve. Maybe it was the shared sense of being adrift, or maybe just the crushing loneliness. But on the third day, Arthur found himself putting out a saucer of milk. The cat approached cautiously, lapped it up quickly, then retreated to its watchful post under the azalea bushes. Arthur started leaving out scraps of food, a bit of leftover chicken, the edges of his toast. He didn't try to pet it. He didn't even speak to it much beyond a gruff acknowledgement. He'd started calling it marmalade in his head, simply for its color. The inciting incident wasn't a dramatic event, but this quiet, persistent arrival. The orange cat inserting itself into the bleak landscape of Arthur's final days. It didn't demand anything, didn't offer pity, just was. A small, unexpected presence in a house filled with absence. Arthur didn't know it then, but this stray cat, appearing seemingly out of nowhere just as he'd given up all hope, was about to irrevocably alter the course of his remaining time. He certainly never imagined it held the key to unlocking a memory he thought was buried forever, embodied in a small, tarnished silver rose. The brooch Eleanor had cherished, the one lost so long ago, a symbol of a happier time he believed he could never touch again. Weeks turned into a month, then two. Autumn began its slow burn across Harmony Creek, painting the maple trees in shades of crimson and gold. Inside Arthur's quiet house, a fragile routine settled into place, centered around the man and the cat. Marmalade was no longer just a porch visitor. He had claimed the house as his own, moving with the quiet confidence of an established resident. He'd often curl up on the end of Arthur's bed at night, a warm weight that somehow felt comforting rather than intrusive. During the day, he'd follow Arthur from room to room or nap in sunbeams on the rug, occasionally rousing himself to demand food with an insistent meow. Arthur found himself talking to the cat more than he spoke to any person. Not conversations exactly, but murmured observations, fragments of memory, complaints about the relentless fatigue that chemotherapy's ghost had left behind. "Damp out today, cat?" he might say, watching the rain lash against the windows, or looking at a photograph on the mantel. "That was Eleanor. We were in Maine that year." Marmalade would sometimes blink slowly or flick an ear, the only acknowledgement needed. His quiet presence filled a sliver of the vast emptiness Eleanor had left. Interestingly, Marmalade seemed particularly drawn to Eleanor's things. He'd bypass Arthur's own worn recliner to leap gracefully into Eleanor's armchair, kneading the fabric before settling down. He'd bat playfully at the loose strands hanging from her forgotten knitting basket. Sometimes, Arthur would find him sitting perfectly still beneath the low-hanging branches of the overgrown rose bushes in the backyard. Eleanor's prized roses, now choked with weeds, Arthur hadn't had the heart or energy to tend since her passing. It was peculiar, but Arthur dismissed it as feline eccentricity. His physical health continued its slow, unavoidable decline. The hospice nurse, Ms. Evans, visited twice a week, monitoring his pain medication, checking his vitals, offering gentle encouragement he rarely felt able to accept. Some days were better than others, moments of clarity and relative comfort punctuated by waves of debilitating exhaustion or sharp localized pain the morphine couldn't entirely erase. He still largely kept to himself. Carol, his neighbor, would sometimes wave from her yard or leave a casserole dish on his porch. But Arthur rarely engaged beyond a polite nod or a brief thank you through the closed door. He appreciated her kindness, but the effort of conversation, of pretending, felt monumental. Explaining his situation, accepting pity, it was easier to remain withdrawn. Marmalade, however, required no pretense. The cat simply existed alongside him, a steady, undemanding companion. Occasionally, Marmalade would bring Arthur small gifts, as cats sometimes do: a fallen maple leaf deposited on the doormat, a particularly smooth gray pebble left near his food bowl, once even a large iridescent blue jay feather laid carefully on Arthur's bedside table. Arthur would murmur a gruff thanks, understanding it as some instinctual offering, disposing of the items later without much thought. They were just random trinkets retrieved from the yard or the surrounding neighborhood. Internally, Arthur wrestled with his growing attachment to the cat. It felt illogical. What was the point of forming a new bond when his own time was so clearly limited? Who would care for the cat after he was gone? There were moments he felt a pang of guilt, as if letting this stray into his life, into Eleanor's space, was somehow a betrayal of her memory. He'd cherished their life together, a complete world unto themselves, and after her death, he'd closed himself off. Allowing this small creature entry felt like cracking open a door he'd firmly bolted shut. Yet, the simple comfort of the cat's warm body nearby, the soft rumble of its purr in the quiet house, was undeniable. It was a flicker of warmth in the encroaching cold, and despite his reservations, he couldn't bring himself to push it away entirely. He needed that warmth, perhaps more than he realized. He just hadn't anticipated that the unassuming orange cat held a connection to his past far more tangible and astonishing than mere companionship. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain, and a chill had seeped into the house that even the thermostat couldn't quite chase away. Arthur sat in his armchair, a photo album open on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in nearly an hour. He felt particularly low today, the fatigue a heavy cloak, the familiar ache in his bones more insistent than usual. He was drifting in that gray space between wakefulness and sleep when Marmalade trotted into the room. Arthur registered the cat's presence vaguely, expecting him to settle on the rug or leap onto the adjacent sofa. But Marmalade walked directly towards him, a determined set to his small body. As described before, he stopped, deposited the dirt-caked object at Arthur's feet, and sat back, watching. The initial stir of curiosity, the leaning forward, the hesitant touch, it all led to the stunning revelation as Arthur rubbed the grime away. The glint of silver, the shape of a rose, Eleanor's brooch, lost for 15 years, here at his feet, delivered by a stray cat. The shock was visceral, electric. It jolted Arthur fully awake, chasing away the lethargy in an instant. He stared at the brooch, then at the cat, then back at the brooch. His mind struggled to bridge the chasm between reality and impossibility. Eleanor had loved this brooch. It was a birthday gift from him, bought during a trip to celebrate their 20th anniversary. She'd worn it constantly. Its loss during that chaotic coastal vacation had genuinely upset her, and him too, more than just the loss of an object. It felt like losing a tiny piece of their shared history. This discovery, this impossible retrieval, was the midpoint, the undeniable turning point. The carefully constructed walls of Arthur's resignation crumbled. He was no longer just passively waiting. A torrent of questions flooded his mind, sharp and urgent. How? Where did you find this cat? Under the porch? Buried in the garden all these years? Did it fall into a neighbor's yard and you somehow sniffed it out? He leaned down, looking Marmalade straight in the eye. Where did you get this? He asked aloud, his voice raspy with emotion. Marmalade simply blinked, offering no answers, perhaps tilting his head slightly as if intrigued by Arthur's intensity. Holding the cool, solid weight of the brooch in his hand, Arthur felt a profound shift within him. The overwhelming grief that usually accompanied sharp memories of Eleanor was still there, but it was intertwined with something else now. Wonder, awe, a sense of connection that defied logic. It felt less like a random occurrence and more like a sign. A message whispered across time, delivered by the most unlikely of messengers. He stood up, ignoring the protest of his joints. The passive waiting was over. He needed to do something, however small. He carried the brooch carefully to the kitchen sink, his movements deliberate. He found an old, soft toothbrush under the sink and gently, painstakingly, began to clean the accumulated grime from the delicate silver petals. As the tarnish gave way to the metal's original luster, memories surfaced not as painful ghosts, but as warm, vivid images. Eleanor smiling, pinning the brooch to her dress before a party, her hand resting on his arm, the silver rose catching the light, her laughter echoing in a sunlit room. He spent almost an hour cleaning it, handling it with a reverence he hadn't felt for anything in years. This small, proactive step, the simple act of caring for this recovered treasure, marked the point of no return. He couldn't unknow this moment. He couldn't unfeel the spark of wonder the cat had ignited. The question was no longer just how he would die, but how he would live with this unexpected, inexplicable gift in the time he had left. The brooch wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a catalyst, pulling him back from the brink of utter despair and setting him on a different path for his final journey. The discovery of the brooch didn't miraculously cure Arthur's cancer, nor did it erase the physical realities of his illness. But it fundamentally altered the landscape of his remaining days. The heavy cloak of despair began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose, a gentle curiosity about the world he had shut out. The first tangible change was the garden. The day after finding the brooch, Arthur bundled himself up against the autumn chill and stepped out the back door, not just to let Marmalade wander, but with intent. He walked slowly towards the overgrown rose bushes Eleanor had so lovingly tended. Weeds grew thick around their thorny stems, the blooms long since faded. He found Eleanor's old trowel and gardening gloves hanging, forgotten, on a hook inside the shed. His energy was limited, his movement slow, but he spent 20 minutes simply clearing the weeds from around the base of one particularly resilient-looking bush, the one that always produced deep crimson blooms Eleanor called Velvet Promise. It was a small effort, leaving him breathless and needing to rest, but it felt significant. It felt like honoring her and honoring the present moment. Marmalade sat nearby, occasionally batting at a dislodged beetle, a silent orange supervisor. He started leaving his front door unlocked during the day when Carol was working in her own meticulous garden across the street. One afternoon, she saw him sitting on his porch steps, cleaning the silver rose brooch with a soft cloth. She came over, hesitant at first, noticing the change in his demeanor. "Arthur, are you all right?" Instead of retreating, Arthur looked up and offered her a small, genuine smile. "Better than all right, Carol. Look what this rascal found." He held up the gleaming brooch, and for the first time in months, he shared something personal. He told her the story about the brooch, Eleanor's love for it, how it had been lost for years, and how Marmalade had inexplicably brought it back. Carol listened, her eyes wide with astonishment and brimming with sympathetic tears. "Oh, Arthur," she breathed, that's just incredible." That conversation, simple as it was, cracked the door of his isolation wider. He accepted the cup of tea she offered later that week, sitting in her cheerful kitchen for a short while, the first time he'd been inside a neighbor's house in years. His hospice nurse, Ms. Evans, noticed the shift too. Arthur seemed more engaged during her visits, asking questions about managing his symptoms, not with despair, but with a desire to maximize his comfort and clarity for the time he had left. He even shared the story of the brooch with her. She listened patiently, professionally neutral, but clearly moved. "Sometimes," she said softly, "comfort comes from unexpected places." Energized by the rediscovery, Arthur began looking through old photo albums again, this time not with a sense of finality, but with a quiet joy. The brooch seemed to unlock memories he hadn't accessed in years, specific moments of laughter, shared dreams, quiet companionship with Eleanor. He'd trace her smiling face in the photographs, the silver rose often visible pinned to her dress or jacket, and feel a profound gratitude for the life they'd shared. He even spent an afternoon half-heartedly searching the areas where Marmalade might have found the brooch, under the porch steps, along the crumbling edge of the back patio, near the base of the old oak tree at the property line, finding nothing but damp earth and fallen leaves. The mystery of its origin remained, but it ceased to matter. The how was insignificant compared to the fact of its return. It felt like a gift, plain and simple. His bond with Marmalade deepened. He talked to the cat constantly now, thanking him for the brooch, telling him stories about Eleanor, confiding his thoughts about the changing leaves or the ache in his joints. Marmalade remained his enigmatic, comforting self, purring loudly when Arthur stroked his orange fur, occasionally bringing another, less significant treasure, a bottle cap, a lost golf ball from the nearby course, which Arthur now accepted with amusement. There were still hard moments, of course. The dark night of the soul wasn't entirely banished. One evening, holding the brooch, a wave of intense grief washed over him. The sharp, agonizing realization that Eleanor was truly gone, that no memento could bring her back. He felt the physical weakness in his body, the constant reminder of his own limited time, and the unfairness of it all threatened to pull him back under. But the despair didn't take root as it had before. He held onto the brooch, felt its cool weight, remembered the improbable way it had returned to him, and focused on the overwhelming sense of love and connection it represented. He breathed through the pain, acknowledging it without letting it consume him. He began preparing for the end, but with a different mindset. He updated his will with his lawyer, made arrangements for his funeral precisely as he and Eleanor had once discussed, contacted a distant nephew to handle the estate. But these were acts of peace, of putting his house in order, not acts of surrender. He wanted to leave things tidy, to ease the burden on others. His focus remained firmly on living each day as fully as possible, cherishing the small moments, the taste of Carol's surprisingly good vegetable soup, the warmth of the sun on his face during a brief walk around the block, the comforting weight of Marmalade asleep on his lap, the gleam of a silver rose brooch resting on his bedside table. The climax arrived not with a dramatic event, but on a quiet, perfect day in mid-November. Indian summer had lingered, blessing Harmony Creek with unexpected warmth and crystalline blue skies. Arthur felt surprisingly well that morning, a good day, as Ms. Evans called them. After a light breakfast, he spent an hour in the garden. The Velvet Promise rose bush, pruned and cleared of weeds, had rewarded him with 3 late improbable blooms, their deep crimson petals velvety soft against the clear autumn air. He'd cut one carefully and brought it inside, placing it in a small bud vase on the table next to Eleanor's armchair. Later that afternoon, he sat in that very armchair, Eleanor's chair, bathed in the warm sunlight streaming through the window. He held the silver rose brooch loosely in his hand, its surface gleaming. On the rug at his feet, Marmalade lay curled in a patch of sun, twitching his whiskers in a dream, occasionally emitting soft purring sighs. The house was quiet, peaceful. Arthur looked around the familiar room, no longer seeing ghosts of absence, but feeling layers of presence. Eleanor's enduring love, the unexpected comfort of the cat, his own quiet sense of acceptance. He thought about the past months since Marmalade's impossible gift. He hadn't been miraculously cured, but he had been healed in a different way. He had found a way to live alongside his grief, not buried beneath it. He had reconnected, however briefly, with the world outside his own sorrow. He had tended roses. He had felt gratitude. He closed his eyes, the brooch cool against his palm. He pictured Eleanor's smile, heard her laughter. He felt no bitterness, no fear, only a profound sense of peace, a quiet readiness. He understood now. The brooch wasn't a sign to keep fighting a battle already lost. It was a reminder of the love that made life worth living and worth leaving peacefully. He opened his eyes and looked at Marmalade, still sleeping soundly. "Thank you, old boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion but steady. "Thank you for bringing her back to me in a way." In that quiet moment of acceptance, bathed in sunlight, surrounded by memory and unexpected companionship, Arthur reached his internal summit. He had faced the end, not with despair, but with grace. Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later. Carol, bringing over a thermos of chicken soup as she often did, found him resting in his armchair, a soft smile on his lips, the silver rose brooch held gently in his hand. Marmalade was curled on his lap, a furry orange guardian keeping watch. The news saddened the small community of Harmony Creek, but it wasn't unexpected. What lingered, however, was the story of Arthur's final months. Carol shared the tale of Marmalade and the brooch, of Arthur's quiet transformation from a withdrawn, grieving man into someone who found peace and joy in his remaining time. People were touched by the inexplicable mystery of the recovered memento and the profound impact it and the stray cat had on Arthur's outlook. His peaceful passing, surrounded by memories of love, felt like a fitting end to a life well lived, even with its share of sorrow. Arthur had, in his final weeks, made clear arrangements. His distant nephew arrived to handle the estate, finding everything meticulously in order. Arthur had left a small sum specifically designated for the ongoing care of my companion Marmalade. There was never any question of sending the cat to a shelter. Carol, whose initial wariness of the stray had long since vanished, immediately volunteered to take him in. Marmalade transitioned easily into her warm, tidy home across the street, quickly finding the sunniest spots on her windowsills. Sometimes, Carol would look out her window and see Marmalade sitting patiently near the velvet promise rose bush in Arthur's now empty garden, which she promised the nephew she would tend. It was as if the cat still felt a connection to the place, to the man who had given him food and shelter, and to the woman whose memory lingered among the roses. The house was eventually sold, but the story lingered in Harmony Creek. It became a quiet testament to the enduring power of love and memory, the unexpected ways comfort can arrive, and how even a small stray creature can deliver a profound message of hope and peace. Arthur's final chapter wasn't defined by illness or despair, but by the rediscovery of gratitude and connection, sparked by an orange cat and a long-lost silver rose.
The orange cat took an old man's shoe to the backyard. The secret was later discovered, surprising everyone. Evergreen Manor, a stately brick building with a wraparound porch and meticulously landscaped grounds, stood as a beacon of tranquility in the quiet town of Oak Haven, nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. The air here carried the crisp scent of pine and the faint, sweet aroma of blooming lilac, a testament to the changing seasons. It was a place where time seemed to slow, where the hurried pace of the outside world faded into a gentle rhythm of shared meals, afternoon naps, and quiet conversations. But beneath the surface of calm contentment, there resided a quiet undercurrent of longing, a tapestry woven with the threads of lives lived, loves lost, and memories cherished. Mr. Arthur Lamb was one of Evergreen Manor's quietest residents. A frail man, his 82 years etched onto his face in a network of wrinkles and fine lines. He spent most of his days in a worn armchair by the window in his small but comfortable room. His movements were slow and deliberate. His hands, gnarled with age and arthritis, often trembled slightly. His world had shrunk, circumscribed by the walls of his room, the gentle routines of a nursing home, and the fading echoes of a past that grew more distant with each passing day. He had no family left, not that he knew of. His beloved wife, Eleanor, had passed away 10 years earlier, her absence a constant ache in his heart. His children, that was a wound that had never healed, a story shrouded in silence and regret. They had vanished from his life decades ago, leaving a void that nothing could fill. The only tangible link to his past, the only object that held any real meaning for him, was a pair of old leather shoes. They were Oxford's, a rich, dark brown, the leather cracked and worn with age, but meticulously polished and cared for. Eleanor had given them to him on their last wedding anniversary, a gift that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now held immeasurable value. He kept them on a small table beside his armchair, always within reach. He'd often pick them up, turning them over in his hands, his fingers tracing the familiar contours, the worn stitching, the scuff marks that each told a silent story. He'd close his eyes, and for a moment, he could almost smell the faint scent of leather and shoe polish, a scent that transported him back to a time when his life was full, when his heart was whole. He remembered the day Eleanor had given him shoes. They had been sitting on their porch, watching the sunset, their hands clasped together. She had presented him with the box, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. "Not very exciting, I know," she had said, "but you need a new pair. And the Sewell, these will last you a lifetime." He had laughed, teasing her about her practicality, but he had been touched by her thoughtfulness. He had worn those shoes every day, through thick and thin, through good times and bad. They had been on his feet when he had walked his daughter down the aisle, when he had held his newborn son for the first time, and when he had stood by Eleanor's bedside, his heart breaking as she took her last breath. Now, they were all he had left, a tangible reminder of a life that was gone, a love that had endured, a family that had been lost. And then there was Rusty. Rusty was an orange cat, a stray who had wandered into Evergreen Manor several years earlier and simply decided to stay. He was a common sight, padding silently through the hallways, sunning himself on the patio, or curled up in a chair in the common room. He was tolerated, even welcomed, by the staff, who appreciated his quiet demeanor and his mousing abilities. But he was not a particularly friendly cat. He kept his distance, observing the residents with a detached, almost cynical gaze, rarely seeking out human contact. Except with Mr. Lamb. For some inexplicable reason, Rusty had formed an attachment to the quiet old man. He'd often be found at Mr. Lamb's feet, curled up in a ball of orange fur, his purr a low, rumbling vibration that seemed to soothe the old man's restless spirit. He wouldn't allow anyone else to touch him, hissing and spitting if they came too close, but he'd tolerate Mr. Lamb's gentle strokes, his trembling hand smoothing his fur. It was a silent companionship, a bond formed not through words or grand gestures, but through shared presence, a mutual understanding of loneliness and loss. Mr. Lamb would sit in his armchair, the shoes on the table beside him, Rusty at his feet, and the two of them would simplibe. A quiet tableau of aging grace, a testament to the enduring power of connection, even in the most unexpected of forms. The routine was comforting, but the seeds of change were already sown, lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to sprout and disrupt the stillness of Mr. Lamb's carefully constructed world. The catalyst, as it often is, would be something small, something seemingly insignificant, a missing shoe, a cat's strange behavior, and a buried secret waiting to be unearthed. The morning began like any other at Evergreen Manor. The sun, still low on the horizon, cast long shadows across the dew-kissed lawn. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and the faint aroma of brewing coffee from the dining hall. A light mist hung in the air, a soft, ethereal veil that blurred the edges of the world. Mr. Lamb awoke slowly, his joints stiff and aching, his mind still foggy with sleep. He reached for his glasses on the bedside table, his movements deliberate and practiced. He put them on, and the world came into sharper focus. He glanced at the clock, 6:30 a.m. Time to get up. His routine was unvarying. He'd sit on the edge of the bed for a few minutes, gathering his strength. Then he'd shuffle to the bathroom, wash his face, and brush his teeth. He'd dress slowly, carefully buttoning his shirt, pulling on his trousers, and finally, he'd reach for his shoes. But this morning, something was wrong. He looked at the small table beside his armchair, where he always kept his shoes. The right shoe was there, its leather gleaming softly in the morning light. But the left shoe was gone. Mr. Lamb frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping the floor, the corners, under the bed. Nothing. The shoe had simply vanished. He felt a flicker of anxiety, a small tremor of unease. He was a man of habit, of order. He relied on the predictability of his routine to keep the chaos of his memories at bay. The missing shoe was a disruption, a small crack in the carefully constructed facade of his world. He called out, his voice raspy and weak. "Nurse? Nurse, is anyone there?" A few minutes later, a young aide, Maria, appeared at his door. "Good morning, Mr. Lamb," she said cheerfully. "Did you need something?" "My shoe," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "My left shoe. It's gone." Maria looked around the room, her gaze settling on the single shoe on the table. "Oh dear," she said. "Well, let's have a look, shall we?" She searched the room thoroughly, checking under the bed, in the closet behind the curtains. She even looked in the bathroom just in case. But the shoe was nowhere to be found. "I'm sure it will turn up, Mr. Lamb," she said, trying to sound reassuring. "Maybe you just misplaced it. Or perhaps one of the other residents borrowed it by mistake." But Mr. Lamb knew that wasn't true. He hadn't misplaced the shoe, and no one else at Evergreen Manor would have borrowed it. These shoes, they were his. They were a part of him, a connection to Eleanor, to a life that was gone. The anxiety intensified, growing into a knot of fear in his stomach. It wasn't just a shoe. It was a symbol, a tangible representation of his past. Losing it felt like losing another piece of Eleanor, another piece of himself. Meanwhile, outside, the light rain had begun. Small drops pattered against the windows, creating a soft, rhythmic sound. Rusty, the orange cat, was behaving strangely. He was usually calm and composed, a creature of quiet dignity. But this morning, he was agitated, restless. He paced back and forth on the patio, his tail twitching, his ears pricked forward. He kept looking towards a particular corner of the garden, a neglected area near the old tool shed, where weeds grew rampant and fallen leaves lay undisturbed. He'd been out all night, a rare occurrence. He usually preferred the warmth and comfort of Mr. Lamb's room, curled up at the foot of his chair. But something had drawn him out into the darkness, something had kept him away. And now, he was carrying something in his mouth. Something large and dark, something that looked familiar. A few of the early rising residents, sitting on the porch, noticed him. "Look at that," said Mrs. Gable, her voice sharp with amusement. "What's little Grandpa got there? Looks like he's caught himself a prize." Mr. Johnson, ever the gentle soul, squinted through his thick glasses. I believe it's a shoe," he said slowly. And it was. Rusty was carrying Mr. Lamb's left shoe, his jaws clamped firmly around the heel, his movements surprisingly delicate. He was heading towards the neglected corner of the garden, the same area he had been fixated on earlier. He reached the spot, a patch of bare earth beneath a sprawling rose bush, its thorns sharp and menacing. He dropped the shoe, then began to dig, his paws moving with a frantic energy, scattering dirt and leaves in all directions. Mr. Lamb, alerted by the commotion on the porch, had shuffled to the window, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a strange, inexplicable hope. He saw Rusty, he saw the shoe, and he felt a sudden, sharp pang off something. He didn't know what it was, but it was powerful, overwhelming. "My shoe," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "He has my shoe." He made his way to the door, slowly and painfully, his cane tapping against the floor. He had to go outside. He had to see what Rusty was doing. He had to understand the meaning of this strange, unsettling event. The missing shoe, the cat's strange behavior, the buried secret waiting to be unearthed, it was all connected. He knew it. And he was about to discover why. Part 3. The Buried Secret Approximate. 900-1100 words. The staff at Evergreen Manor, initially amused by Rusty's antics, quickly realized that something more significant was unfolding. A small crowd gathered on the patio, watching the orange cat with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Mr. Lamb, his face pale and drawn, stood at the edge of the group, his gaze fixed on Rusty, his hands gripping his cane for support. "What on earth is he doing?" asked Nurse Sarah, her brow furrowed with concern. "I've never seen him act like this before." "He's burying something," said Mr. Johnson, peering through his thick glasses. "Looks like he's trying to hide Mr. Lamb's shoe." The initial assumption was that Rusty, in a fit of feline mischief, had stolen the shoe and was now attempting to conceal his prize. Cats, after all, were known for their unpredictable behavior, their penchant for collecting and hiding odd objects. "We should probably stop him," said Maria, the young aide. "He'll ruin the shoe, and Mr. Lamb is clearly distressed." But as they approached the corner of the garden, they noticed something peculiar. Rusty wasn't just digging a hole. He was carefully placing the shoe in it, positioning it with a strange deliberation, as if he were performing a ritual. And he wasn't burying it completely. He was leaving the top part of the shoe exposed, almost as if he wanted it to be seen. "That's odd," said Nurse Sarah, her voice thoughtful. "It's almost like he's marking a spot." She knelt down, carefully moving the damp earth away from the shoe. She noticed that the ground beneath the shoe was different, softer, as if it had been disturbed recently. She dug a little deeper, her fingers brushing against something hard and rectangular. "What is it?" asked Mr. Lamb, his voice trembling with anticipation. Sarah continued to dig, carefully removing the soil around the object. And then she saw it. It was a small wooden box, old and weathered, its surface covered in a layer of damp earth. It was wrapped in several layers of faded, almost disintegrated cloth, as if someone had tried to protect it from the elements. A hush fell over the small group. The amusement had vanished, replaced by a sense of awe, of reverence, of the profound mystery unfolding before them. This was no longer a cat's playful game. This was something far more significant. "Mr. Lamb," said Nurse Sarah gently, do you recognize this box?" Mr. Lamb shuffled forward, his eyes fixed on the box. He reached out, a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the damp wood. A flicker of recognition, a faint spark of memory, ignited in his eyes. "Tu don't know," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "It feels familiar." But he couldn't quite grasp it, the memory hovering just beyond his reach, shrouded in the mists of time and grief. But he knew, deep down, that this box held a secret, a piece of his past that had been buried, forgotten, and now, miraculously, unearthed. With Sarah's help, he carefully lifted the box from the ground. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. The wood was cold and damp to the touch, and the cloth wrapping was falling apart, revealing glimpses of the dark, aged wood beneath. They carried the box inside, to Mr. Lamb's room, where he could examine it in privacy and comfort. He sat in his armchair, the box resting on his lap, his hands trembling as he began to unwrap it. The cloth, brittle with age, crumbled in his fingers, revealing the box in its entirety. It was a simple, rectangular box, made of dark wood, possibly mahogany or walnut. It was unadorned, with no carvings or embellishments, but it possessed a certain elegance, a craftsmanship that spoke of a bygone era. He carefully lifted the lid. The hinges creaked, protesting after years of silence. And inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were two objects. A letter, its paper yellowed and brittle with age, and an old photograph, its edges frayed and its colors faded. The photograph was of a family. A young Mr. Lamb, his hair dark and full, his arm around a beautiful woman with a radiant smile, Eleanor. And standing in front of them, a young boy, no more than 5 years old, with his mother's eyes and his father's mischievous grin. Their son, Mr. Lamb, stared at the photograph, his breath catching in his throat. The memories flooded back, sharp and poignant, overwhelming him with a wave of grief and longing. He remembered that day, the day the photograph was taken. It had been a picnic in the park, a perfect summer day filled with laughter and sunshine. He remembered the feel of Eleanor's hand in his, the sound of his son's laughter, the warmth of the sun on his face. He reached for the letter, his hand trembling so violently he could barely hold it. He recognized the handwriting instantly, Eleanor's elegant, flowing script. He unfolded the letter carefully, the brittle paper crackling in the silence. And then he began to read. The words, faded but still legible, were a message from the past, a voice from beyond the grave, a key to unlocking the secrets that had haunted him for so long. It was a message of forgiveness, of hope, and of a love that had endured even the most devastating of losses. He could almost hear the faint scent and sound of Eleanor, sitting beside him and whispering. Mr. Lamb held the letter with trembling hands, the brittle paper feeling fragile and precious. The words, written in Eleanor's familiar, flowing script, seemed to leap off the page, bridging the chasm of years and loss. He began to read, his voice a soft, wavering whisper, as if afraid to break the spell. My dearest Arthur, if you are reading this letter, it means that I am gone and that a great deal of time has likely passed. I write this with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of hope, a belief that even in the darkest of times, love and forgiveness can prevail. There are things you don't know, Arthur, secrets I've kept buried deep within my heart. Secrets about our son, about the circumstances of his disappearance. I know the pain it caused you, the unanswered questions, the endless searching. I saw the light fade from your eyes, the joy replaced by a sorrow that consumed you. It wasn't a kidnapping, Arthur, not in the way you imagined. It was a mistake, a terrible, heartbreaking mistake. I was young, overwhelmed, and struggling with things I couldn't share with you. Your mother, she offered to take him just for a while, to give me some time to get myself together. Mr. Lamb paused, his breath catching in his throat. His mother? He had never suspected. She promised she'd bring him back. She swore it was only temporary. But then she moved, taking him with her. She said it was for the best, that I wasn't fit to be a mother. She cut off all contact. I tried to find them. Arthur, I truly did. But I was powerless, alone, and heartbroken. I never told you the truth. I was ashamed, afraid of your judgment, afraid of losing you. I let you believe he was gone, lost forever. And that lie, that terrible lie, has haunted me ever since. I know this letter cannot undo the past, cannot erase the pain you have endured. But I hope, with all my heart, that it can offer you some measure of peace, some understanding, and perhaps even a glimmer of hope. Our son, Michael, he may still be out there. He will be a grown man now. If by some miracle this letter finds its way to you, and if you're still searching, please, Arthur, don't give up. Forgive me, forgive his grandmother, and open your heart to the possibility of reconciliation. Maybe, just maybe, he is looking for you too. All my love, always and forever. Eleanor. The letter slipped from Mr. Lamb's trembling fingers, falling onto his lap. He sat there, stunned, his mind reeling, his heart overwhelmed with a torrenting mix of emotions. Grief, guilt, anger, regret, and hope. A fragile, flickering hope that had been dormant for decades, now rekindled by Eleanor's words. Flashbacks flooded his memory, filling in the gaps, providing the missing pieces of the puzzle. He remembered Eleanor's increasing anxiety and withdrawal in the months leading up to Michael's disappearance. He remembered her evasiveness, her refusal to talk about it, her insistence that they simply accept their loss and move on. He had attributed it to grief, to the trauma of losing a child. He had never suspected the truth. He remembered his own anger, his frustration, his growing resentment towards Eleanor for her seeming inability to cope, to heal. He had withdrawn into himself, building a wall around his heart, a wall that had separated them even before her death. He felt a wave of guilt wash over him, so intense it almost brought him to his knees. He had blamed Eleanor. He had judged her. He had failed to understand her pain, her desperation. He had let his own grief blind him to the truth. And his mother, he had always had a difficult relationship with her, a woman who had been critical, controlling, and judgmental. He had never imagined she was capable of such cruelty, of such a deliberate act of betrayal. But amidst the pain and the regret, there was also a glimmer of hope. Michael, his son, might still be alive. He might be out there, searching for him, just as he had searched for him all these years. Rusty, who had been sitting quietly at Mr. Lamb's feet throughout the reading of the letter, seemed to sense the shift in his emotions. He rose, stretched, and then jumped onto Mr. Lamb's lap, nudging his head against his chest, purring loudly. Mr. Lamb buried his face in Rusty's fur, his body shaking with sobs. He wept for Eleanor, for Michael, for the lost years, for the pain they had all endured. But he also wept with a newfound sense of purpose, a determination to find his son, to right the wrongs of the past, to finally bring closure to this chapter of his life. He looked down at Rusty, his faithful companion, the cat who had, in his own mysterious way, led him to this moment of truth. "Thank you, old friend," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for bringing me this." He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. He had no idea where to begin his search, how to find a son he hadn't seen in decades. But he had a starting point. He had Eleanor's letter, the photograph, and a renewed sense of hope. And he had Rusty, his silent, furry guardian, his link to the past, and his guide to the future. He would not give up. He would find his son. He owed it to Eleanor, to Michael, and to himself. Part 5. A familiar face approximate. 9001100 words. The days following the discovery of the letter and photograph were a blur of activity for Mr. Lamb. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a surge of energy he hadn't experienced in years. The fog of grief and apathy that had shrouded him for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a determined focus, a burning desire to find his son. With the help of Nurse Sarah and the staff at Evergreen Manor, he began his search. They contacted local authorities, missing persons organizations, and even hired a private investigator. They put up notices online and in local newspapers, hoping for any lead, any clue that might point them in the right direction. But the search was daunting. Decades had passed. Michael could be anywhere, living under a different name, with no memory of his early childhood. The odds were stacked against them, but Mr. Lamb refused to be discouraged. He clung to Eleanor's words, to the fragile hope that his son was still out there, waiting to be found. Meanwhile, life at Evergreen Manor continued its gentle rhythm. The residents, inspired by Mr. Lamb's story and his renewed vigor, seemed to draw strength from his determination. They offered their support, their encouragement, and their own stories of lost loved ones and unexpected reunions. And then, one crisp autumn morning, a new face appeared at Evergreen Manor. He was a young man, early 30s, tall and lean, with a shock of unruly brown hair and kind, intelligent eyes. He introduced himself as Nam, a volunteer from a local community outreach program. He was there to help with various tasks, reading to the residents, assisting with activities, and generally providing companionship. From the moment Nam walked through the door, there was something about him that felt familiar, not just to Mr. Lamb, but to many of the residents and staff. It wasn't a specific feature, not a particular resemblance, but a certain aura, a sense of quiet warmth and empathy that resonated with them. Nurse Sarah, who had been instrumental in Mr. Lamb's search, was particularly struck by the young man's demeanor. She found herself drawn to him, wanting to know more about his background, his story. Nam, for his part, seemed equally drawn to Evergreen Manor. He'd been assigned to various volunteer placements before, but this one felt different. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a sense of connection to the place, to the people, a feeling of belonging. He was particularly drawn to the quieter residents, the ones who seemed to carry a weight of sadness, the ones who needed a listening ear, a gentle touch, a moment of human connection. He had a natural empathy, an ability to connect with people on a deeper level, to sense their needs and offer comfort without judgment. He was introduced to the residents, one by one, and eventually he was brought to Mr. Lamb's room. Mr. Lamb was sitting in his usual armchair, the photograph of his family clutched in his hand. Rusty was curled up at his feet, his orange fur a splash of color against the muted tones of the room. When Nam entered, Mr. Lamb looked up, his gaze meeting the young man's. And for a moment, time seemed to stand still. It wasn't a dramatic, earth-shattering revelation. It was a slow, gradual dawning, a flicker of recognition in Mr. Lamb's eyes. He saw the familiar shape of the jawline, the curve of the eyebrow, the gentle slope of the nose. He saw the kindness in his eyes, the warmth in his smile. He saw Eleanor. He didn't say anything, not at first. He simply stared, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind struggling to process the impossible. Could it be? Could this young man, this stranger, be his son? Nam, feeling the intensity of Mr. Lamb's gaze, felt a strange stirring within him, a sense of connection he couldn't explain. He smiled tentatively, extending his hand. "Hello, Mr. Lamb," he said. "My name is Nam. I'm here to help." Mr. Lamb took his hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He held on to it for a long moment, his eyes searching Nam's face, looking for a sign, a confirmation, a spark of recognition. Rusty, who had been observing the scene with his usual feline detachment, suddenly rose, stretched, and then, to everyone's surprise, jumped onto Nam's lap, purring loudly and rubbing his head against his chest. It was a gesture of acceptance, of affection, that he rarely bestowed on anyone other than Mr. Lamb. Nurse Sarah, watching from the doorway, felt a lump form in her throat. She had seen the resemblance, the connection, the moment it had happened. She knew, instinctively, that something extraordinary was unfolding. But he has your eyes. Mr. Lamb was the one to break the prolonged silence. His gaze went to Nam, to the cat, and then back again. Part 6. The threads converge, approximate. 800-1000 words. Nam looked down at the cat purring contentedly on his lap, then back at Mr. Lamb, a gentle confusion in his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir," he said softly. "My eyes." Mr. Lamb swallowed hard, his gaze unwavering. "Eleanor," he whispered, the name a breath of air, a prayer. "My wife, she had her eyes. The same shape, the same color." He reached out a trembling hand, not quite touching Nam's face, but tracing the air around it, as if mapping a familiar landscape. Nam felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard that name before, whispered in hushed tones by his adoptive mother on her deathbed. A name linked to a past he didn't understand, a family he had never known. "Eleanor was your wife?" Nam asked, his voice hesitant, searching. Mr. Lamb nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "And then she was your mother." He gestured to the photograph still clutched in his other hand. This is us. You were just a little boy." Nam took the photograph, his fingers trembling slightly. He stared at the faded image, at the young, smiling faces of the man and woman, at the small child with his own unruly brown hair. He saw the resemblance, the undeniable connection. It was like looking into a mirror, a reflection of a past he had never known, a family he had always longed for. And why my adoptive mother told me I was lost. Nam said, his voice choked with emotion. She said she found me, that she couldn't find my parents. Mr. Lamb closed his eyes, a wave of pain washing over him. Your grandmother, he said, his voice heavy with regret. She took you. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake. The story began to unfold, pieced together from fragmented memories, whispered confessions, and the long-buried secrets of the past. Nam listened, his heart aching for the pain his father, his biological father, had endured, for the loss that had shaped his life. Nurse Sarah, who had quietly entered the room, stood by the door, witnessing the scene with a mixture of awe and compassion. She had suspected, of course, from the moment she had seen Nam's face, from the way Rusty had reacted to him. But to see it confirmed, to witness this reunion, this reconciliation, was something truly extraordinary. The staff at Evergreen Manor, alerted by the hushed whispers and the palpable air of emotion, began to gather outside Mr. Lamb's room. They had all grown fond of the quiet old man, and they had followed his search for his son with a mixture of hope and trepidation. One of the older nurses, Mrs. Davis, who had worked at Evergreen Manor for many years, remembered Eleanor. She used to visit Mr. Lamb, you know, she whispered to a colleague. Before she passed, she always brought him flowers, and she always asked about the cat Rusty. She said he reminded her of a cat they used to have. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, revealing a picture that was both heartbreaking and heartwarming. A picture of a family torn apart by tragedy and misunderstanding, reunited by a twist of fate, a cat's intuition, and the enduring power of love. They decided, discreetly, to confirm the connection. Nurse Sarah, with Nam's permission, took a DNA sample. The results, expedited by a sympathetic lab technician, came back a few days later. The confirmation was delivered in a quiet, private meeting in Mr. Lamb's room. Nurse Sarah, holding the sealed envelope, looked at Mr. Lamb and Nam, her eyes filled with tears. It's a match, she said softly. You are father and son. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years, of loss, of unspoken longing. Mr. Lamb and Nam looked at each other, their eyes locking, a silent understanding passing between them. Mr. Lamb reached out and took Nam's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. The tears streamed down his face, tears of grief, of relief, of overwhelming joy. Nam squeezed his father's hand, his own eyes filling with tears. He had found his family. He had found his father. He had found a connection to a past he had never known, a future he had never dared to dream of. And Rusty, the orange cat, the silent witness to it all, purred contentedly, his amber eyes filled with a knowing, feline wisdom. He had, in his own mysterious way, brought them together. He had opened the door to a broken family, allowing the healing power of love and forgiveness to finally mend the wounds of the past. The secret was out, carried on the whispers of the wind, the scent of old leather and the unwavering loyalty of an orange cat. Part 7. Reconciliation and renewal approximate 600 to 800 words. The days and weeks that followed were a time of profound transformation for both Mr. Lamb and Nam. They began to build a relationship, tentatively at first, like two strangers cautiously circling each other, then with growing trust and affection, like a long-lost path rediscovered. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, filling in the vast gaps in their lives. Mr. Lamb recounted his life with Eleanor, their early years of happiness, the joy of Michael's, Nam's, birth, and the devastating pain of his disappearance. He spoke of his relentless search, his unwavering hope, and the crushing despair that had eventually led him to withdraw from the world. Nam, in turn, shared his own story. He spoke of his adoptive mother, a kind woman who had loved him dearly but had always been evasive about his past. He spoke of his growing sense of unease, his feeling of being incomplete, his yearning to know his true origins. He spoke of the strange, inexplicable feeling of familiarity that had drawn him to Evergreen Manor, a feeling that now made perfect sense. Rusty, the orange cat, became the bridge between their two worlds, a shared source of comfort and affection. He'd curl up on Mr. Lamb's lap, purring contentedly as they talked, his presence a silent reassurance, a living link to the past. He'd also spend time with Nom, rubbing against his legs, accepting his gentle strokes, as if acknowledging their newfound connection. The staff at Evergreen Manor watched this blossoming relationship with a quiet joy. They had witnessed Mr. Lamb's transformation, his emergence from the shell of grief and loneliness that had encased him for so long. They saw the light return to his eyes, the smile that now graced his lips, the renewed energy that animated his movements. They also saw the change in Nom, the blossoming of a young man who had finally found his roots, his identity, his place in the world. He was no longer a solitary volunteer. He was a son, a member of a family, a part of something larger than himself. One sunny afternoon, Mr. Lamb and Nom decided to visit the cemetery where Eleanor was buried. They stood together by her grave, a simple stone marker engraved with her name and the words beloved wife and mother. Mr. Lamb placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, a mixture of blooms that Eleanor had loved. He spoke to her softly, telling her about Nom, about their reunion, about the healing that had begun. Nom, standing beside his father, felt a profound sense of connection to this woman he had never known, this woman who had given him life, who had loved him, who had never given up hope of finding him. They then went and placed the old, worn left leather shoe on the grave, a symbol. As they walked away from the cemetery, the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows across the grass, Mr. Lamb placed his arm around Nom's shoulders, a gesture of love, of acceptance, of a family finally reunited. The story ends with Mr. Lamb, Nom, and Rusty sitting together on the porch of Evergreen Manor, watching the sunset. The air is filled with the sounds of birdsong and the gentle murmur of conversation. The sky is ablaze with color, a vibrant tapestry of orange, pink, and gold. Mr. Lamb smiles, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reaches his eyes. He looks at Nom, his son, and at Rusty, his faithful companion, and he feels a sense of peace, a deep, abiding contentment that he hasn't known in decades. The wounds of the past are still there. The scars will always remain, but they're no longer raw and painful. They are a part of his story, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of love, and the unexpected ways in which healing can come. The orange cat, with a knowing glance, had opened the door to a broken family's healing, a silent guardian of secrets, a furry angel of reconciliation, proving that even in the twilight years, hope can blossom anew, and love, lost and found, can find its way home.